Ayubowan, Vanakkam. I'm Vayoni Dimel. This is Boston Lanka News, bringing you news, views and entertainment from Boston and USA. Panel would not infringe on Sri Lanka's sovereignty, according to UN Secretary General. Is there a hit list? Boston Lanka asked the Amnesty International in USA. Any follow-up for 2009 Sri Lankan Expatriates Forum held at Temple Trees? Here's Daminder, Boston Lanka, Georgia correspondent. The United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has said that he is going ahead with his proposal for a panel of experts on Sri Lanka despite the objections from the Sri Lankan government, but added that the panel would not infringe on the country's sovereignty. Sri Lankans in New York and in neighboring states demonstrated near the United Nations building against the decision of the UN Secretary General. Secretary General responded a question about Sri Lanka.
Mr. Secretary General, you've received a letter from the non-aligned movement which argues that you and your office as Secretary General really don't have any jurisdiction over human rights or alleged war crimes. The letter's about Sri Lanka, but the logic would apply to Myanmar, Guinea, North Korea. I wonder, what's your response to their argument of limiting the scope of your jurisdiction?
First of all, about the letter addressed to me by the non-aligned movement, it is clear from the NAM letter that there is a misunderstanding on the nature and purpose of the panel of experts that I intend to establish. I will take this up directly with the non-aligned movements. On this report which you have seen, quoting Sri Lankan government, that my establishment of this commission of experts would be tantamount to interfering the internal matters of Sri Lanka. Again, this is in accordance with the joint statement issued as a result of my visit and as a result of my meeting with the President Rajapaksa May last year. This joint statement contained a commitment related to ensuring an accountability process for addressing violations of international humanitarian and human rights laws. The panel I am establishing will advise me on the standards, benchmarks, and parameters based on international experience that must guide any accountability process such as the one mentioned in the joint statement. This does not in any way infringe on the sovereignty of Sri Lanka.
Sri Lankan government defense spokesperson Minister Keheliya Rambukwella challenged international human rights group Amnesty International to release the alleged media hit list in its possession to the public to prove that such a list actually exists. The Amnesty International claims it is in possession of a hit list believed to be compiled by the Sri Lankan intelligence unit with names of at least 35 leading journalists and NGO officials. Minister Keheliya Rambukwella further accused Amnesty International of being biased. Boston Lanka contacted the Amnesty International USA and spoke to Jim McDonald, Sri Lanka country specialist in his Chicago office. Mr. McDonald, according to the Amnesty International press release, there is a hit list. Could you please comment on that list?
Yes, the list is symptomatic of concerns that Amnesty International has expressed over the last several years about the threat to freedom of expression in Sri Lanka. As you may know, at least 14 media workers have been killed in Sri Lanka since the beginning of 2006, with no one brought to justice for those murders. Other journalists have been tortured and arbitrarily detained. Some have left the country after receiving death threats. At least 2 journalists have allegedly disappeared in the custody of the security forces. Amnesty is calling on the Sri Lankan government to demonstrate their commitment to human rights protection, by inviting the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression to visit the country without delay.
What are the actions Amnesty International has taken on the disappearance of journalist Pragit Ekneligod?
Amnesty, shortly after his disappearance, launched an urgent action appeal and asked members of our worldwide urgent action network to write the Sri Lankan government on his behalf, calling for a prompt investigation into his disappearance and to have anyone held accountable who's found responsible for his abduction. More recently, 6 weeks later, since he has not yet reappeared, we've also publicized his case again on the Amnesty International USA blog site, which is blog.amnestyusa.org.
Some in Sri Lanka says that Amnesty International gets most of their information on Sri Lanka human rights violations from anonymous sources or some human rights organizations or activists in Sri Lanka who wants to destabilize Sri Lanka and bring disrepute to the country, who are working in collaboration with Sri Lanka opposition groups. Now, what do you have to say to that?
Perhaps obvious reasons, Amnesty does not publicly comment on its research sources. We do say that we get information from a variety of sources, both within the country and outside.
In November 2009, when the Sri Lankan government invited the Sri Lankan expatriates for the Sri Lankan Expatriate Forum 2009 to the Temple Trees and to attend the lavish banquet, the Sri Lankan expatriates responded, hoping that the government would utilize their expertise for the nation-building effort. After ending the war, many wanted the government to work hard on building the nation and to bring the country together. Dr. Trishanta Nanayakkara, what is your assessment on government's performance so far?
After this war, there was a massive opportunity to rethink about these root causes that give rise to civil uprisings and start a nation-building program. A national reconciliation process has to be started in order to understand the aspirations of all ethnic groups. A political solution that serves a fair portion of these aspirations will make all ethnic groups begin to respect the Constitution that guards their rights and serves their aspirations.
Dr. Nanayakkara, some could say that we cannot expect the same standards in our legal system, human rights or even media freedom, like, for example, a country like USA. We've just come to normalcy after 30 years of brutal war. I think we need some time, and these human rights groups have to be a little patient. What do you have to say to that?
I think to build the whole country, United States, they took only 200 years. We have had 60 years after the independence, and what more are we asking? Like, I am a little disappointed with a lot of expatriates who live in these countries with democracies and enjoy that rule of law, democracy, and human rights, and then they become very vocal if those rights are violated. But when they talk about their mother country, Sri Lanka, they tend to settle down with very relaxed standards. Like, they don't mind these human rights violations, they don't mind democracy is threatened, and they don't mind even the economy, the slow growth of the economy. So, like, for example, they don't mind if the opposition presidential candidate was arrested for doing politics while in uniform. And when the president's son could do politics while in uniform. So when I talk to people, those so-called hardcore patriots of Mother Lanka living outside the country, they say, oh, that is Sri Lanka.
Boston Lanka is happy to welcome and introduce our correspondent from Atlanta, Georgia, Daminda Manamendra. Daminda was with the Sirasa FM and MTV in its early stages and now lives in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome to our Boston Lanka team.
All right, thank you very much.
That concludes our news edition this week. We meet you next week with another edition of news, views and entertainment from Boston and USA. Till then, goodbye.